Now I'm going to go over the different bones that you need to learn in the body. And it looks like just a big pile of bones, right? Some of the test questions that you'll get will have the bones actually on a skeleton, which makes it a lot easier to identify because you can look at the skeleton and see where they are. But when bones are just sitting on the table, that makes it a lot harder. You will probably have 5 or 6 of these, and you'll have to identify them without seeing where they are on the skeleton and without being able to compare them to each other, meaning you can't memorize that the hip bone is bigger than the scapula because they may not both be there on your test. You would only have one probably, and so you need to learn other features of these bones so that you can tell them apart. And the reason I put these two together is because students often get these two mixed up with each other. So they're in the pelvis video, I already went over the parts of the hip bone. I have not yet talked about there's no other video that talks about the scapula. So let me show you the difference. The reason why students get them mixed up is that they both have this broad, flat area. They actually do look a little bit alike, but there are features on each that will help you distinguish between them. So the hip bone has the obturator foramen, which is a big old hole, and the scapula doesn't have a hole at all. Also, the hip bone has this socket, this deep socket called the acetabulum, right? That is where the head of the femur fits in. And the scapula doesn't have a deep socket like that. It has a shallow socket for the head of the humerus to fit in. And this shallow socket is called the glenoid cavity. And you can see how shallow it is, certainly compared to the deeper acetabulum. Okay, one more feature of the scapula. So on the test, if I point to the glenoid cavity, you need to say glenoid cavity of the scapula. If I point to this very prominent ridge here, this is called the spine of the scapula, which if your arms are long enough, you can reach behind. Remember, this is your shoulder blades, which you're never going to call it that. You're always going to call it the scapula. But you can feel this ridge on someone's back, the spine of the scapula. So make sure that you use all the terms. Put spine of the scapula or glenoid cavity of the scapula. There are a couple of bones that I didn't even include in your lab manual. And the reason is that they're kind of obvious what they are. This is the patella. There's no other bone that looks like it, so that's easy. This is curved real thin. This is a rib, and I hope no one will get it mixed up with sorry, a little sidetrack there. My phone was off the hook and it started beeping and I thought you could hear that. I hope nobody gets it mixed up with another long bone in the body because it's curved and it's much thinner. So this is a rib. I feel like that's kind of easy, so I'm putting that off to the side. Here's another bone that really looks different from the other bones. See how it's got this S shape? This is the clavicle. You used to know it as the collarbone, but not anymore. It's the clavicle. There is a picture of this in your lab manual. There should be. There is as of the time of this recording. And then let's talk about, oh, this one's easy, the sacrum and the coccyx. So sacrum, coccyx. Okay. And here's the sternum. These are the costal cartilages that attach the sternum to the ribs. The sternum is actually made up of 3 bones. The manubrium, so you can see little sutures in between each, or they're not sutured, they're not called sutures. Little joints between each one. Manubrium, body, xiphoid process down at the tip. So that's easy. You know what this is if you see this, right? And now the hands and the feet. This is a foot, right? So all of these smaller bones here are called tarsals, and there are two that you have to know. One is the heel bone that you stand on, right? Don't call it a heel bone, call it the calcaneus. And then superior to the calcaneus is the talus. And this is the tibia, and they articulate together on that little platform here. So if you look at the foot this way, all these are tarsals, and then metatarsals and phalanges. And I recommend that when you're looking at this, taking the test, that you look at your foot also, and the part of your foot that's covered with skin and not separated into individual toes, these are metatarsals, and then the phalanges, the toes, are all separate from each other. So you can tell, because a lot of times I ask students to identify a metatarsal and they say phalanges. Same with the hand. These short bones down here are the carpals, metacarpals, and then phalanges. And in order for you to really realize what's what, is imagine it right next to your hand, and the part of your hand that's covered up with flesh, those are going to be the metacarpals. And then the phalanges are all separate. So all these long bones get mixed up all the time. And remember, you might only have one of them on your test. So you can't say, well, the bigger one, the medium one, the small one, right? I'm going to start out with the three big ones. There's another video that goes over the features of the femur, and that's something that you need to know. So the way that I explain this to students is that the femur has a round head and a thin neck, whereas the humerus has a round head and it does not have a thin neck. It doesn't have a neck there. So that's the difference between the femur and the humerus. The round head, skinny neck on a femur, round head and kind of no neck on the humerus. Also, on the distal end of the humerus, you can see these weird ridges and bumps. To me, that feels exactly like my elbow. You can actually, reach into your elbow and feel that. And the knee doesn't have the same weird bumpy features. It's got features. You can't feel any of these, though, in your knee. The tibia is the third big, heavy, long bone. The tibia does not have a round head at all. Okay? So the tibia, no round head. The femur, round head, skinny neck. The humerus, round head, no neck. And then the other three long bones get mixed up a lot because they're all long and thin. These are the hardest, I think. Well, they're the hardest until I show you what I'm about to show you. The way that you can tell the difference between these three is that the radius has this weird disc. It's the size of your thumb. Your thumb fits real nicely in this weird flat disc. The other side's just pointy and uninteresting. But the radius on the skeleton, remember, is near the thumb. So thumb, right? Radius. The ulna has this U-shaped structure, U for ulna at one end. And then the fibula has nothing interesting at all.